Hey guys, this is C.S. Joseph doing a new episode for season 14. We're doing Pedagogue relationship lectures. This is intimacy for ESFJ and ISTP, which is a fantastic couple if I've ever seen one. And it's also the same relationship pairing as my grandparents on my mother's side. So, very interesting one, and this pedagogue relationship definitely hits very close to home. Very close to home. Gosh, my grandfather, ISTP, he's a man's man. They all are, you know, those ISTPs. Some of the most alpha of all the males in terms of 16 types, basically, which pretty fantastic if you think about it. STPs and NTJ men, they just have that moxie about them, you know, being able to be so alpha. I mean, like my grandfather, like he was quite the pragmatic guy, and he was never wrong. He was never wrong. Yeah, he died some years back, but died of prostate cancer, actually. But still a fantastic individual, and did what he had to do. So, and my grandmother and him, they've been through a lot. They absolutely been through a lot. My grandmother's still alive, though. They had a very interesting life together, full of risk and intrigue and all sorts of shenanigans. I guess that's what happens when both of them were in the Central Intelligence Agency. My grandfather was a field operative, and my grandmother was the executive secretary to the director of Central Intelligence. Actually, multiple directors. Seems that when a particular director would move on, that director would just inherit the secretary, and she stayed there for a while. Gosh, she'd tell me all these stories about how many times they polygraphed them, like over and over and over and over, and how annoying that was. Yeah, she's got some crazy old war stories, especially during the Cold War. Oh man. So everyone's going through intelligence all the time, and they sure liked her and her results when it came to the polygraph. That's for damn sure. So, but anyway, they met in a skating rink. Quite frankly, my grandmother went with one of her friends to the skating rink, and she's like, "I don't even want to go skating. This is dumb." She had her skates on, and she was just sitting all grumpy and whatnot on the side of the rink itself. My grandfather, he was already out there. He was already skating around, going around in circles and whatnot. And every time he'd come by to pass, he's just smiling at my grandmother, just smiling at her. That's all he'd do. And he'd come around another pass, keep smiling at her. And then he'd come around another pass, keep smiling at her. And she's like, "What is going on here? What is going on?" My grandfather was kind of this, oh gosh, who'd he look like? Looked a lot like Johnny Cash in a lot of ways. But he also looked like Elvis too. A lighter hair color Elvis as well. So my grandmother's like, "Oh yeah, Johnny Cash and Elvis. It was either those two or your grandfather. And I chose your grandfather because it was the best of both worlds for me, right?" So, but yeah, they met in the skating rink, and he comes over and he sits down next to her after a while, and he asks her out on a date. And lo and behold, here I am, right? Some generations later. It's always nice seeing how that works out. But yeah, that's where they got started. But nothing could prepare them for the life that they would have after the fact. Let me give you an example. After a while, my grandfather was sent to Central America on a field operation. He wasn't even allowed to tell anyone, not even his wife, my grandmother, where he was going. He was gone for 2 weeks. Just straight up disappeared. And he left. Went on a mission. Came back. And he immediately resigned. He went into Central Intelligence. And he immediately quit. Just quit. Then he took the entire family, my grandmother included, and moved them to Seattle. They lived just outside of Washington, D.C., so they could drive into Langley, etc. But they got out of that, and they went, and he packed everything up and took her all the way to Seattle, basically. And he started working for a telephone company out in Seattle. At least that's what he claimed, right? And my grandmother worked at the Seattle Bureau. And she was with the agency 19 years. She missed out on clenching her retirement, sadly, which is pretty lame, working for Central Intelligence for 19 years. Fantastic. So, they've been around. But that was just one of the hurdles that their marriage and their relationship took because of my grandfather just randomly disappearing, going on a mission, coming back, and then seemingly randomly quitting. But who knows? There's so many different versions of the story, so not really sure about that. So anyway. So my ISTP grandfather, he's always just done whatever he wanted. My grandmother was totally cool with that. My grandmother would always tell me stories about how desired my grandfather would make her feel, or how wanted she always felt around him all the time. My grandfather also understood my grandmother was just super mega loyal. She never abandoned him. She never left him. There's even a time later where my grandfather actually got involved with some church cult of some kind in northern Washington state, the Hobart Freeman movement, which is part of the Word of Faith aspect of Christianity, what I like to call the Church of Laodicea from Revelation chapter 2 and 3, basically. And my grandfather got involved with them pretty hard. But then he just left. Yet, for some reason, somehow, I'm the only one in the family who thinks he was basically doing a mission for Central Intelligence, and that his job at the telephone company was still field ops. Except they're doing field ops internally in the United States, and it wasn't necessarily something that was external. I personally believe that he was sent to actually monitor the Hobart Freeman movement from the inside in their little compound that they had in northern Washington state, out by Linden. I can't prove this, and my grandfather refused to talk about it because he took everything to his grave. Absolutely everything. Which is fine. Luckily, my grandmother's a little bit more talkative, but even she won't talk about a lot of stuff as well. Definitely out of fear. I remember her telling me, as a little boy, about how she said, "I'm not allowed to join the agency. You're not allowed to join the agency." And there's a particular circumstances where, I came under the impression that I was being recruited for the agency and whatnot, and my grandmother freaked out. But those opportunities fell by the wayside. And that's okay. It's fine. I wouldn't trade my many years of homelessness for that life, because I learned so much, and I get to be here in front of you people as a result of those decisions. So, anyway, the point is that just from my personal experience, I'm trying to share with you folks just how turbulent an ISTP, ESFJ marriage can get A lot of people, they think like, oh, this must be a really boring situation, but it's really not. ISTPs, let's be honest, they're kind of the least boring of all the types. NI child, they just keep going and going and going. Like my grandfather, my mom said something to him in passing about needing a small path cut out on her back property, and then the next day my grandfather shows up with a freaking dozer and just dozes it down. And she's like, what the hell? That's not what I had in mind. But, that's just who he was. Very afraid of making people feel bad all the time. But, like I said, my grandparents' relationship was definitely not without conflict. Especially when my grandfather left for the church cult. It really split the family, heavily damaged his son. His firstborn is an INFJ. His secondborn is an ENFP. And his thirdborn is my mother, the baby of the family. She is an ISFJ. So very interesting dynamics, as a result. So then, due to familial drama involving my two uncles, my mother ends up not talking to her oldest brother, but that's a whole other story. A lot of pain and family drama there that a lot of us can't really get over to this day, even though we still try. But at least people are talking now, and they weren't for a while. But the thing is that as awesome as pedagogue relationships are, because they're amazing, and I recommend them for marriage probably as much as I would recommend them for bronze pairs as well. I don't usually recommend golden pairs for marriage. On paper I do, but when it comes down to straight up practicality, a pedagogue relationship versus a bronze pair relationship, and then ultimately a golden pair, I still think pedagogue is probably the absolute best relationship for anyone out there. The thing is that, it's got highest sexual compatibility, and as I said in the previous lecture, they can get it on like Donkey Kong. But the thing is that it's a relationship where there isn't very much enabling, and there is a huge risk of enablement and being enabling in a bronze pair or a golden pair type of compatible relationship. And all of this can be a serious problem. So when it comes down to understanding how compatibility goes in this regard, you got to be on your guard. That was a nice pun. Thank you very much. So definitely got to be kind of aware of those concepts regardless. Let's adjust the gain ever so slightly. That might help a little bit more. Yeah, it should. Okay, cool. So my grandparents, as a result, still had to deal with the same struggles that any pedagogue relationship would. And remember, folks, that's highest sexual compatibility combined with very low emotional compatibility. And whenever you want to be successful in a pedagogue relationship, you want to make sure, you really, really want to make sure that you are being there in a situation where, hey, I can still contribute, obviously sexually and whatnot, but I also need to be able to meet your emotional needs while making sure that my emotional needs are being met, right? That is the challenge of a pedagogue relationship, but it absolutely can be done. All pedagogue relationships, it can be done. However, I would like to state that pedagogue relationships are easier, technically speaking, when you have perception hero functions instead of decision-making hero functions. So the ESFJ ISTP relationship is a hero function relationship, a decision-making hero function relationship, which means the risk of having more incompatibility is higher than, say, someone who is a perception hero, like ENTP, INFJ, ENFP INTJ, right? For example, or ESTP ISFJ, right? So those kinds of relationships have huge advantages on the pedagogue side, and I would say that statistically they're more successful because of the fact that they are perception hero related pedagogue relationships. That's not to say that the same level of success can be achieved amongst a decision-making hero pedagogue relationship, but it still has a few more obstacles that have to be overcome, I guess, in the relationship for both people. It just means that having that emotional connection is so much more important to an ESFJ ISTP relationship than a sexual connection. A sexual connection would always be far more important to, say, an INJ, an ENP, or an ESP, or an ISJ, for example. Those would be far more important. But when it comes to an FE hero and a TI hero, that could be problematic. And this is the same thing even with like an ENFJ INTP approach. But we didn't exactly talk about this concept very much in previous lectures for this second season of season 14. Well, this second series within season 14, excuse me. So, because we're doing all of the relationship pairings in a series of 8 episodes within season 14. So season 14 is going to be freaking huge by the time it's done. But yeah, so this decision-making problem, because of how the hero functions are within the function stack for both these types, actually increases the chances of having conflict. And while it's true that a pedagogue relationship has high sexual compatibility still, and they actually put a little bit more value on emotional compatibility than, say, they would for sexual compatibility, right? So, yeah, just because they get into a fight and then they have make-up sex, it's not going to be as repairing or as impactful for them than, say, a perception hero-based pedagogue relationship. This is really important to know. Which means when it comes to prioritizing emotional needs, I'd say for the relationship ESFJ ISTP, yes, absolutely make sure your sex life is optimized whenever possible. But you need to have a much higher priority of, say, for example, that emotional connection than you would necessarily sexual connection, because your inferior functions are absolutely going to be far more starved and far more sensitive than those who have, perception functions in those slots. Because perception functions in those slots, all those sensitivities and all those hurt feelings can really be repaired by sexual intercourse. It really can. But it's not really going to be repaired as much or at a higher level when you're dealing with people who have decision-making functions in their hero and their inferior slots. Which means emotional compatibility to them is a much higher priority. It means so much more to them. And it also ends up becoming a source of conflict on a regular basis. My grandfather and my grandmother is no different. It's no excuse, quite frankly, except no one ever taught them this before. They ended up divorcing over it. But because of the power of the pedagogue relationship, they ended up getting remarried and reconciling. And that was a huge and very important step for my family to see the level of mercy afforded between both these two people, despite the fact that they were constantly shitting on each other's emotions and each other's decision-making functions. So, understand this concept very importantly, before I get into what to do and how this all works. So if you don't get this concept, you're not going to be able to make this pedagogue relationship work. Now, this concept still definitely applies to ENTJ, INFP relationships, ENFJ, INTP relationships, ESTJ, ISFP relationships, etc. All of that information still applies. So this concept applies to all of those relationships. I just haven't really had a chance to talk about it because I really wanted to get the foundation laid down here within Season 14 when it came to pedagogue relationships. I think it's important. I think it's valuable. And then as a result of that, we find ourselves in a situation where we can have some serious benefits. Like, for example, your marriage being saved, right? So yes, ESFJ ISTP, they can get it on like Donkey Kong. And the ISTP just wants to, if it's the ISTP man, absolutely wants to rail his ESFJ woman. Or if it's an ESFJ man, absolutely loves it when his ISTP woman climbs on top and rides him hard. Let's be honest. That, in general, is probably some of the most common sexual interactions they have. And ISTP men, they are obsessed with doggy style. Let's be straight. That's just reality. STP men, they are really obsessed with doggy style. That's just a thing. That's just a thing. So it'd be no different than in this relationship. But like I said, sexuality, while important, especially super important to a pedagogue relationship, there still is an overemphasized amount of sensitivity when applied to the emotional compatibility of the relationship. So let's talk about that. Where is an ESFJ? Where would be my grandmother be most sensitive within the context of this relationship? Well, just like with everyone else, it's the inferior function. The inferior function is literally where it is. The inferior function is where the sensitivity exists. Well, that's how it is in both of them. And this right here is where it is the crux, it is the core of the emotional incompatibility. Because TI wants to be listened to by a TE user. In order for TI to be fulfilled as a TI inferior, it needs to be listened to by a TE user. Well, here's the problem. Where is there a TE user in an ISTP? Well, it's in their nemesis function. So they're worrying about other people's thinking, to the point where an ISTP can become some of the most stubborn of all the types, to the point where the ISTP is completely unwilling to listen to anyone. That's why they are considered some of the most, if not the most, stubborn of all the types. So psychologically speaking, this causes a lot of problems within the context of a relationship. Check out that waterfall, guys. Isn't that fantastic? I can kind of see it right there. Isn't that dope? Anyway, the point is, because ISTPs have a hard time listening to people, the ESFJs not listened to. And that can be a serious problem. Like, a big problem, right? So, when they're in a context of, like, a marriage or an exclusive monogamous relationship of some kind, those two people, they'll start falling apart just off of that. Because the ESFJ has this huge need of, well, I need to be listened to, even if you think I'm wrong. Because that's the only way that their FE hero, because of the cognitive axis it's on, it's the only way that that FE hero is going to allow themselves to feel good about themselves. Because emotionally, they already have that FI nemesis, where the ESFJ just worries about their own self-worth, right? They're worrying about their self-worth. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy enough. I'm not worthy of her. I'm not worthy of him, basically. I'm not caring enough. I might be too selfish. And they're worrying and they have concern about their own self-worth in the context of the relationship. So what they need is something called external validation from an emotional standpoint. They need that external validation. And the external validation comes when someone is listening to them, because an ESFJ is like, oh wow, if this person is standing here and listening to what I'm saying, even if they disagree with me, that means that they value me. And I feel valued by them. And now I don't have to worry about my self-worth anymore. Right? Well, let's look at how the ISTP would be in this situation. What is the ISTP's biggest need? The biggest need the ISTP has is to be valued and to be made a priority, the top priority. Now, usually ESFJs could pull this off. The problem, however, is that ESFJs are so worried about their own self-worth that they start catering and serving everyone else around them that oftentimes they neglect to serve their ISTP more. That they end up serving everyone in their life equally, including the ISTP. If this ISTP is a man, they're really not going to be okay with it. I mean, an ISTP woman could probably deal with it from an ESFJ man for a while. It would still bother her, and her emotional needs aren't being met. But to a man, it's really a big deal. It's actually on the edge of being disrespectful. And in the ISTP man's eyes, it's basically grounds for ending the relationship. So understand how gender comes into play here, folks. So it's actually more likely. It's so weird because from a masculine and feminine standpoint, since ESFJs are really feminine type and ISTPs are real masculine type, you'd probably want ISTP men with ESFJ women ideally. However, because of the emotional incompatibility issues and how ESFJ women especially attend to other people and have a really hard time making their ISTP priority one, because the ESFJ is worried about, well, what should I be making the priority right now? And then someone new comes along. The ESFJ is the starter type, puts all the energy into the start of a situation, the start of support, we'll call it, or start of care for all of those nursing folks out there. It's the same exact concept. And the ISTP man has to watch his ESFJ woman do a start of care for every single person she comes into contact, and he's like, well, what about me? When are you going to care about me? When are you going to handle me? Right? All these things matter. You know? So oftentimes, people don't even realize the consequence of their actions. So yeah, on paper, from a masculine and feminine point of view, ISTP man, ESFJ women, probably more likely to survive and make it through with this relationship long term. But given how women are as an ESFJ supporter, they have to learn the habit of putting the ISTP above everybody else, which is really hard, because that's what the ISTP means. The ISTP needs to be top dog, top priority, regardless of their gender at all times, but especially if they're a man. If that's not there, they're going to feel disrespected, and then they're going to stop loving the ESFJ, and they're going to find another woman who respects them. It's not that hard. That's literally how it works. So based on that, please be aware of the differences, right? Please be aware that this is the main threat to a relationship between these two people. True, the ISTP can get heavily guilted into things, and that can frustrate the ESFJ, because it's like, why are you getting guilted over that? Or vice versa. the ISTP can be really frustrated with the ESFJ, and it's like, well, why are you spending so much time thinking about that? That's not correct. And that leads to additional conflict within the context of the relationship. A lot more conflict, which just sucks, quite honestly. Sucks to be them, and the relationship will break apart over time. Again, not what I recommend. So, what do these two people do? Yeah, the sex is great, and they have to constantly overcompensate the lack of emotional compatibility in their relationship with great sex. I mean, seriously, ESFJ is definitely like, you get to a point where it's like, hey, he's got to have really good hands, and he's got to know how to manhandle me, you know what I'm saying? Like, I've had many ESFJ, I had an ESFJ woman told me to my face one time, like, yeah, if he doesn't give good anal, I'm not interested. And I'm like, dang. Yeah, well, introverted sensing parents and introverted sensing heroes like to be impacted as much as they can from a sexual standpoint, regardless of their gender, but especially women. So keep that in mind when it comes to, as an ISTP, trying to evaluate your sexual performance. So, beyond that, though, what do you do? What do you do to solve this latent incompatibility between both these types? Well, what you always do in a pedagogue relationship, you switch emotional roles. ESFJs, they have the highest amount of FI. They have FI nemesis, whereas an ISTP has FI demon. Therefore, it is the responsibility of the ESFJ to be the FI user in the relationship. Okay? What about extroverted thinking? Extroverted thinking is a nemesis for an ISTP. Extroverted thinking is a demon for an ESFJ. Therefore, it is the ISTP's job in the relationship to be the extroverted thinker and to think about things out loud. And of course, all the ISTPs that are listening to this right now are cringing when I say that. Because it's like, wow, why do I have to sit there when the ESFJ in my relationship hasn't thought everything through? They don't know what the hell they're talking about. I already have the answer. Why do I have to sit and wait and listen to their irrelevant and inaccurate spittle that doesn't actually make sense, and they often contradict themselves? Why do I have to do that? Why do I have to subject myself to listening to someone who's already wrong, where I'm not getting any value out of it? Because that's what their emotional need is. And you're just going to have to get over yourself. Get over it. Your ESFJ needs to be listened to in order for their emotional needs to be met. That's just the reality of the situation. You might want to understand that. So, therefore, because the ISTP takes on the role of extroverted thinker, instead of making TI statements or TI judgments, the ISTP has to be willing to humble themselves. Good luck. ISTPs, I think out of all of the types, struggle with humility the most. And I think they have a huge problem, male or female, with pride. Pride. TI pride, that is. The kind of pride that makes their brain an echo chamber. The kind of pride where they rely on last known input for decision making. The kind of pride that will cause them to make decisions before doing any research. That kind of pride. TI pride. It's not to say that FI can't be prideful either. FI turns into this person who's all about their own achievements and their own titles, etc. And how all of that is far more important. It makes them special. FI is all about how special I am, right? That's the truth. So, gotta love it. Gotta love it. So, yes, ISTPs, you're just going to have to listen, whether you like it or not, even if you know they're wrong already. And as an aspect of listening, you have to practice active listening, which means you have to put yourself in a position where you're asking questions. And instead of telling your ESFJ that they're stupid or that they don't know what they're talking about, you instead humble yourself to the position of asking questions. And you start asking questions like, how do you know that? Or how did you come to that conclusion? How do you know, where's your sources? Where'd you get that information? How did you figure that out, right? This, by asking questions, doesn't put the ESFJ on the defensive, and it doesn't make them feel unloved, for example. It doesn't make them feel unloved. It doesn't make them feel unappreciated, and it doesn't make them feel disrespected, right? They're getting their emotional need met because you're asking questions, which is concrete proof to them that you're listening to them. This makes them feel valued. This makes them feel wanted. If it's an ESFJ woman, she'd definitely be wet after you doing that, just so you know. Like, that's just reality, okay? Well, let's go even further with it. What about the ISTP side? What do they get out of it? Because they're so interest-based. ISTP's like, well, well, what do I get out of it, right? Because as long as I get mine, right? You ISTPs are so silly. Don't forget, Jeff Lowe on the Tiger King documentary, and that guy is the guy who conned Joe Exotic out of his zoo. That guy's an ISTP. Don't forget that. Anyway, what do ISTPs get out of it? ESFJs, you must prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that you care more about the ISTP than anyone else. If you do anything else for someone that is not the ISTP, make sure you do double for the ISTP every single time. When the ISTP speaks, you stop speaking and you start listening. In fact, ESFJs, you want to be real successful in your life? Then I recommend that you speak way less and start listening way more. Out of all the types, you folks are the folks that benefit the most from listening. Even though you go out of your way to get everyone else to listen to you, and even though oftentimes you don't care to listen to anybody else. This really pisses people off, especially ISTPs with TI Hero. It really pisses them off. In fact, it makes them ragey. Don't do it. It's literally a bad decision. And quite frankly, I would tell you that you're a bad wife or a bad husband as an ESFJ if that's how you're doing it. I would actually tell the ISTP to not want you anymore if you're doing that to them. So I suggest you start by going out of your way to listen more than speak. The ISTP should be listening to you if they took my advice. Then as a result of taking that advice, they would be asking questions instead of making statements about how wrong you are, and then instead challenge your thinking by asking you how you arrived to your conclusion, only for you to realize that you can't actually prove your conclusion. Sometimes you can. Most of the time you probably can't. And they need to go back to the drawing board, and the ISTP should be patient enough to allow you to go back to the drawing board and to rethink it. And then the process starts over again. That way your emotional needs are always being met. However, when it comes to the ISTP, you have to make them top priority. Which means, like if they're an ISTP man, they eat first. No one in the house eats until they do. You know what I'm saying? It shows them respect. They really like having traditional dinners with their family, especially if no one eats until they do, because they feel respected, because they feel valued. They feel regarded by the family that they work their asses off for, right? It's one of the reasons why ISTP men and women are often the other man or the other woman in a cheating situation, because they're like, wow, society is so screwed up. No one's willing to make me the priority, so I'm going to make myself the priority. And then they end up facilitating those really bad sexual relationships as a result. That sucks. But it's because given how ISTPs are some of the most capable, especially physically capable of all the types, they literally could figure anything out mechanically. They're literally, mechanical geniuses, whether or not they know it or not. They can understand engineering. They can understand any skill and learn any skill and teach any skill, and they reach mastery of skill after they've teaching it or constantly teaching it to other people with their ENFJ subconscious. That because of all this effort and all this work that they put into things, damn it, they better be valued. Damn it, they better be made the top priority. Don't forget, when it comes to monogamous relationships, the man needs to put his own life and his own interests first. Then he considers thinking about himself. Then he considers thinking about his woman. Then he thinks about his children. Then the animals. Notice, there's 2 slots for himself. That's how much of a priority a man needs to be making himself in a relationship. A woman, sorry to say this, ladies, but in a marriage, y'all are second-class citizens. That's just the reality. And as much as you may say that's, misogynist, chauvinist, or whatever, I mean, my condolences to your feminine conditioning or your feminist conditioning. But the thing is, how could you honestly respect or be aroused by or attracted to a man that did not live his life that way anyway? It's funny. It's why people often say, never ask a woman for advice on women, because a woman oftentimes doesn't even know what she wants. She claims to know what she wants, but the reality of the situation, she actually doesn't. This is why women are more towards the yin, which is not solid. Women not being solid in what they want or what they think. This causes women to be opportunistic, especially in sexual relationships. But that's also why men are idealistic within their sexual relationships, right? It's also why men are the disposable sex as well. And ISTPs, especially ISTP men, really understand this more than anybody. Well, the thing is, though, it becomes everyone's responsibility to make sure that everyone's needs are being met. You have to take responsibility and enforce these boundaries with your partner. If you're an ESFJ, you have to tell your partner, they have to listen to you, even if they disagree with you, and they have to ask you questions instead of making TI judgment or statements, which will make you feel hurt. And you say this to them consistently. ISTPs, what you tell ESFJs is that the ESFJ needs to make you the absolute priority at all times. At all times. Now, if it's an ESFJ man, because of the priority system, yeah, you still got to make your ISTP woman a priority above other people, especially other women. But at times, obviously, when you're a man and you're in male space, you can allow yourself to be supportive to your fellow men in that situation. But just understand what that boundary is. You still have their onus and the responsibility of making your ISTP, regardless of your gender, regardless of their gender, the top priority, the top dog. Because if they ain't top dog, what the hell are they even with you for to begin with? Because that's not what they want. They want to be top dog. They want to receive recognition from you for their contributions. An ISTP's greatest fear is becoming a burden on their family or people who are close to them. Becoming a burden. It's a huge fear they have, right? So based on that fear, you need to make sure that you are properly enabling them to not be a burden, while simultaneously showing them appreciation for their contributions. Or else, their brain will assume, their mind will assume they're a burden to you, and then no longer want to be around you anyway. See, that's a catch-22. Have you ever thought of that, right? Have you ever considered that? You might want to figure that out. That's a huge risk. That's a huge risk to your relationship, right? Anyway, in summary, ISTPs, go out of your way to listen to your ESFJs, even if you think they're wrong, and then ask them questions during the conversation so that you don't come off as a total dick or a douche nozzle because you're making TI statements. That's not true. You're wrong. You're stupid. You know, no one cares about that, especially, least of all, ESFJs. ESFJs, make your ISTP top priority, top dog in your life. Anytime you offer help or support to someone else, there better be a double portion for your ISTP, so the ISTP could feel valued above everyone else in your life. And if they do not, they will leave you. They will not want you anymore. Beyond that, as well, make absolute sure that you give them recognition for every contribution they make to you. Say thank you. Show gratitude. You're the FI user of the relationship, remember? Therefore, you have the onus of showing gratitude and being grateful, and do it through action to your ISTP. It's very important. If you don't do this, you don't love or respect your ISTP, and you're not meeting their needs. I wonder how many of you ESFJs out there feel guilty about this right now. You should feel guilty if you're not doing it. Just like ISTPs should feel guilty if they're not doing it. All of these lessons come with a promise. Here is the promise. If you live your lives this way within the context of this pedagogue relationship, I promise you, you will be successful. I promise you that you will be able to have the greatest possible relationship. The conflict that comes as a result of having low emotional compatibility. The growth that comes as a result of switching emotional roles. Taking on the TE user, or taking on the role of the FI user in the relationship for the other person's sake. What it will build neural pathways in you that will ensure your success. They will ensure your success in the relationship as well as success in your life. It will help you reach enlightenment. It will help you reach cognitive integration. No other relationship exists because pedagogues teach each other. Pedagogues are each other's teacher. And as a result of that, everybody will get to the point where they finally understand each other and they finally understand themselves, such that they forgive themselves, forgive each other, love themselves and each other. And the world's a better place. Well, at least the world underneath their roof. You know what I'm saying? So, anyway, with that being said, folks, I hope you found this lecture useful, helpful, educational, enlightening. Please leave a comment below. I hope you guys are enjoying the Pedagogue series. I think the next episode we have is the ESFP ISTJ episode. With all that being said, folks, I'll see you guys tonight.